Hello everyone. In this video I'd like to talk through the process of speciation, and in it I'm going to refer to two particular scientists. I say scientists, they really are true biologists, naturalists and geographers also, and that's Darwin and Wallace. Now Charles Darwin is probably the more well known of the two, and he's on the left of this picture that I have on the screen. So this one here, just draw a little arrow, is Charles Darwin. Both of these biologists worked in and around South America and were interested in the formation of new species. But what's interesting is Darwin saw evolution as a directionless process, and that via things like natural selection, species that were better adapted could survive, thrive, quite simply just reproduce, and that was it. Wallace, on the other hand, Alfred Wallace, who also proposed similar theories to that of Darwin with regards to natural selection, saw evolution as more of an intelligent design. So what we're going to do is just define speciation, which really is a culmination of what these two biologists worked on, and then we're going to look at how we actually form new species. And that's a very general introduction. I do have separate videos that deal with the work of Darwin and Wallace more in detail, but let's consider speciation and what we actually mean by speciation. So speciation is the separate evolution of two populations of the same species to form two separate species. Now it sounds quite a mouthful, so I'll write all that down. So what we've got is separate evolution, of two populations of the same species. So for whatever reason, we have this one species here, but we've somehow ended up with two populations of it. And both of these populations are evolving separately from one another. So separate evolution of two populations of the same species to form, and this is really key, to form two separate species. And that is how we define this word at the top, speciation. So let's think, what would the process be in forming these new species? In fact, there's four key steps in the formation of new species. Step one is what's called isolation. So I'm just going to make a few notes here, but I'll talk through each one. So just put that there. Isolation. Now, a geographical barrier of some kind would separate a population, restricting members from interbreeding, so that's breeding with one another. So by geographical barriers, we can be thinking things like mountains, rivers, lakes, really kind of obvious things. So quite simply, if I just draw a rough set of pictures here, just purely for a visual. So we've got lake here, we've got some mountains here. We have species A on this side, and members of the same species B over here. We've got two separate populations. They're the same species, but because of this barrier, because of this geographical mountain in the way, they're going to evolve slightly differently, and that's because of the processes that are about to follow. So the first thing we need is isolation. The second key element to speciation is what's called genetic variation. Now, each individual has a different set of alleles. Alleles are alternate versions of genes. So each individual has their own different set of alleles, providing varying characteristics. But as well as that, we can get mutations, and they may also alter the gene pool. Mutations are changes, spontaneous changes within the base sequence of the DNA. So the second step in this formation of a new species is genetic variation. So we've got to isolate the populations, then we get this variation, and then that leads into stage 3. And stage 3 is natural selection. And I do have a separate video all about natural selection as an actual topic and process. Now, certain members of the population in each subgroup can better adapt to the diverse environmental conditions, and so those will survive, pass on those alleles to the offspring, and the surviving members of each subgroup will vary distinctly with time. So we have this isolated mechanism, we've got variation in place already, but then because of natural selection, only certain members of each subgroup are able to actually survive in their conditions. So within each step, or after each step rather, what we're getting is this specialization, these particular members of the population that are starting to vary, and these differences are becoming much more prominent. And then that leads to step 4, the final step. And step 4 is this at the top, speciation. That is the final step. These two subpopulations can no longer interbreed, and what we create are two new but closely related species. In fact, I might just add that as a separate bit in the brackets here, that they are closely related. And one of the questions an examiner may ask is, how could you prove that these two species are closely related? And that would come, or the answer would be essentially a DNA analysis or study of the genetics, and you look for similar base pairings. The more similar the DNA, the more likely they are that they're a closer relative to one another. So there we have it, the process of speciation. Very, very simply, a separate evolution of two populations of the same species to form two separate species. You have an isolating mechanism, usually a geographical barrier, to separate the populations to prevent interbreeding. That subsequently leads on to genetic variation, including mutations to alter the gene pool. We then have natural selection taking place, where only those that can adapt to changing environmental conditions survive, thrive, and pass on those alleles to their offspring. And then finally we get true speciation, where the two subpopulations can no longer interbreed, and we end up with two brand new species. Okay, hope all that helps.